Hi, welcome to this video on the channel. If you're just joining us, welcome. If you're already a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. If you get some value out of this video, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. In this video today, I'm going to talk about how to pace a 5K row, give you some thoughts about kind of how to get your mind around how to row this kind of a piece. I've already done a 2K row one on my channel, so I hope this one will complement it. I've had a few inquiries from people I work with, clients about this, so this is why I'm putting this out. The 5K row is interesting. It's typically, a 20-minute plus or minus effort, depending on, where you're at with different things. So maybe it's 25 for you, maybe it's an 18-minute. It just depends where you are. And my goal in this video is to just talk you through how I think about coaching a 5K row. So the first thing that I would say that is important is, first of all, there's kind of a learning curve, right? You're going to learn how to row this piece, okay? And I think initially you're going to start perhaps a little bit conservatively while you're trying to figure out, what your target pace is for a particular piece. So, with that said, I think there's a few things to think about in terms of, well, what should your 5K pace be ideally? So when you're thinking about your 5K pace, typically it's just going to depend like how quick your 2K is, right? So for example, if your 2K split is a 2-minute split, which would equate to an 8-minute 2K, then typically, your 5K split is going to be somewhere between plus 6 to 8 seconds per split slower. So it might be reasonable to say that, if you're rowing a 2-minute split, then your 5K pace ideally might be a 2:08 for, that particular distance. Okay, this is just a rough rule of thumb for this. But when I was in college, what I found was that my 2K split, when I was going the fastest that I could, was like something like a 133. So my 5K split would have been like a 138, 139, like plus 5 to 6 seconds of that 2K. So just to kind of give you a general scope, depending on what your speed is, like if you're rowing a 6-minute something 2K, then you can add 5 seconds to your 2K split. If you're rowing an 8-minute 2K, then you probably need to add about 8 seconds, 8 or 9 seconds to your 2K split. So that gives you a general sense of how that split should work. The next piece of advice I've got for you is, number one, as you learn to pace this, you're going to get a little bit more comfortable with going to your target pace earlier in the piece than trying to build into it as you go. Like typically, if you're learning how to row a 5K, it's a good strategy to take it kind of easy over this first half of the piece, and then build into it as you kind of learn, where that intensity is for you, right? But overriding all of this or the foundation of all of this is my next tip, which is you really need to race it, right? You need to think about, how do I race this piece? This is not a steady state piece. This is a test piece. And so, getting to the point where you're comfortable really going for it, over 20 minutes, it is a mindset thing. As we tell all the youth athletes that I row, one of my big pieces of advice is, let's race this. Let's treat this as a race piece rather than a steady state. So that's my number 2 piece of advice for approaching a 5K. So the next thing is like, okay, now let's say, for example, we're at the start line here. Your first 20 strokes of that piece, once you've decided what your target split is going to be, they can be hard strokes. You can row hard for 10 to 15 strokes. But the key here is that once you get to the end of that first 20 strokes that you settle into your pace. All right. And so, for example, if your 5K pace is 208, for example, then looking at this after that first 10 or 15 strokes, you want to settle into a split that's something like a 210 or 209, like +1 or +2 of your intended target pace for that whole piece. And the things to look out for here when you hit that settle here is definitely make sure that you have good length, right? Come out for length. Make sure that you're hitting a good rhythm, right? So being in rhythm is important. And just making sure that you're getting into a nice efficient stroke. Make sure there's plenty of length and acceleration, and just get comfortable. But the key here is to get to that target pace and settle in and start to get your body moving towards that anaerobic threshold point, right? So getting yourself into rhythm here, and essentially rowing that first half of the piece a split or two slower than your target split, so that you're not building up too much lactic acid in the first half of that piece, so that you start paying for it over the second half of that piece. And really, you're racing it, but you're being smart about that first half of the piece, not overdoing it, and just making sure you're sitting up, you're accelerating that stroke all the way through, and you've got that length and acceleration and rhythm really in hand, and relaxing between the strokes, so that you've got a good base of rhythm to build off in that first half of that piece. So that's my advice. Hard 15 strokes, settle, be good about settling to that target split +1, +2, and just have the confidence in your own ability to row that piece as it progresses and the meters tick by. All right, and so the next part of this is, assuming that we've rowed, a good, steady, long, in rhythm, in control, first 2,500, then the tiredness is in, right? You're really into it at this point. You're starting to get tired. You're halfway, and so what happens here is the mind game that occurs in the middle of this piece, right? And what happens is, and this is the mistake that people make, is they start to worry about if you're at the 2,000 meter point, or you're at the 2,500 meter point, then you start to mentally project. So let's say we're here, halfway through the piece, and then mentally we start to project and think about, well, what am I going to feel like when I'm here? What am I going to feel like when I'm here? I wonder what I'm going to feel like at the end of the piece. So what happens is, even though you're not there, you start to mentally project out to those points, and that's a trap, right? That's the trap we want to avoid. The reality of this is, once you're into this phase of the piece, you're going to start to feel it. But the reality of it is that during that piece, yes, it starts to get a little bit worse, but it doesn't get much worse all the way through to the end, right? So the number one do not is, don't project, right? We're not wanting to project down the course, right? I think what you've got to do is stay current with your strokes, count 5-stroke pieces, count 10-stroke pieces. That's the psychological trick to rowing a good 5K, is to not worry about, that what am I going to be like 500 meters from now? What am I going to be like for 1,000 meters from now? It doesn't actually get much worse. And stay present, right? Stay with that stroke that you're on. And if you can do that and you've rode that first half in a way that's smart and you've done your training, then you're just going to take the second half of this piece 500 meters at a time, right? Or one stroke at a time, and trust in your ability to survive the piece in terms of doing the piece well and working well. So that's the one thing I would say is don't project and stay confident in your own ability. Again, keep your strokes long, right? So again, we're still focusing on keeping that length over the second half of the piece, making sure that you're accelerating all the way through, and keeping that pace and staying current with where you are and not worrying about what's going to happen 100 strokes from now. Like, trust in your own ability to do that. So that's my number one psychological tip for handling a 5K row. And so, as a result, if we're rowing this second half of the piece, once we hit that 2,500, we want to make sure that we're hitting our target split for the next 1,250, right? For sure, or certainly through to the end of the piece, right? So that we're doing that. So, in terms of like what that's going to be like, typically what's going to happen is your rate is going to come up a little bit, right? You're going to start to get tired, and one way to keep that split is to bring the rate up a little bit. And I would recommend that your rate for this in general could be around about the 26 strokes per minute to 28 strokes per minute. So that's the rate zone you're in. I think some people can do this at 30, 32 strokes per minute. Some people prefer to do this at 24 strokes a minute. That is a general rule, but that is just a good target. Your 28 strokes per minute is your good 5K type rate, right? So when you're thinking about that, that's kind of what we want to be hitting. And so as a result, we start to think a little bit about pushes through this, like 10-stroke pushes as you progress through this piece. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what a push should look like and what it shouldn't be, ideally. So on the subject of pushes, what I will say about this is, typically, if this is the start of your piece right here and this is the end of your piece right here, then your pace. So if this is pace on the y-axis and the line, the horizontal line here represents your target pace. You're going to do something a little bit like this, right? Trying to hit that target pace. And as you progress, it's possible that your rhythm gets a bit stale and you come off your pace. And the way in which to do the pushes is that your push should be a push to kind of refresh the rhythm and keep that sharpness back. So if you're going to push, get up a little bit above it, and then just try and get back into that target pace, right? So that's what pushes do. They just sharpen things up and bring you back to that target pace. The mistakes that people make with the pushes is that sometimes, let's say you're here and then you do a push for 10 and you do this sort of quicker push than you really need to, and what ends up happening is you go faster than your target pace, and then you come slump right back down again. And this push is too hard, so what happens is you end up building too much lactic acid up, right? The takeaway point here is that your pushes should bring you back into your rhythm, keep things fresh, and keep things moving along, but not be pushes that are just way faster than your target pace. They're just little landmarks here to keep things fresh and to keep you in that zone. And that's my advice on the pushes. And as you're pushing, what I would say is your pushes should be like trying to make the wheel go faster at the end of the stroke, right? Rather than like a legs 10, think about it as a speed 10, right? Think about it as a surge 10 through that stroke. I think that's a more effective way to do a push. So hopefully that's helpful there in terms of thinking about how to keep your piece fresh, how to keep on that pace, how to keep things sharp, sharp and light and flowing, rather than just trying to do a killer burn for 20 strokes and then, come right back off your pace effectively. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so for the last part of this video, we're going to talk about the final 1,000 meters here, right? So, when we're looking at things, what's going on right here, right at the end of the piece, like that last 1,000 meters. And the best advice I've got for you is, it might just be that you've been working really hard, and essentially, it is enough to hold that split through to the end of the piece, right? And this is where the discipline comes in. This is where when you're rowing that last 1,000 meters and you're tired, generally the best crews are fairly similar physiologically, but how do they handle their technical model and hold up their technical model in that last 1,000 meters, right? So, I've said it again, but it's worth mentioning again that, are you staying long with your drive length in that final 1,000 meters, right? And then the analogy that I give to my clients and rowers is, in that last 1,000 meters, you want to really be thinking about rowing like a swan swims, right? If you look at that swan across the surface of a pond, they're very graceful above the surface of the water, but below the surface of the water, they're paddling really, really hard, but you just can't see it. And they don't give away that effort. And that's where we want to be. It's that balance, really it's that sort of fine line between, staying aggressive, right? And this is really rowing in a nutshell, is staying aggressive, but also respecting the fact that you have to stay in control. And the best rowers kind of are able to balance those two things and channel them, essentially channel them into speed, right? And so how do we balance those things? So that's my advice really for the last 1,000 meters is understand you're getting tired. The best athletes kind of are able to keep that power, keep that technical model, keep a cool head, even though your heart rate's at 180, 190, maybe a little bit higher for that last 1,000 meters. And how do we stay in control and just continue to apply that power? And can, like I've said to you with the power 10s and the force application, hard catch, but surge through that stroke and aim to release that wheel at the end of the stroke with as much speed as possible. Like that's going to define, the gold medals versus the silver medals and the bronze medals, right? So be looking at those things as you progress. So, and if, in the graphic here, I've got the last 750 where you power up. Certainly choose your moment. It doesn't have to be the last 750. It could be the last, 350 where you really start to power up. But understand that, just increasing the rate itself will not necessarily make you go faster. So that's why I always say any rate change, any speed has to be done through the drive. So the rate's going to come up because you're applying more power in an applied and efficient way during the drive. Therefore, your drive time is less because you're putting more impulse into every stroke, more force, acceleration into every stroke. So therefore, you create a bit more time on the slide so that you can go faster. I think, you know, some people generally try to spin their wheels, where they are rating faster, but they're not going any faster because they're not accompanying that rate change with power. So commit to that power. You know, take a couple of strokes where you sit up a little bit, and then drive on from there if you're trying to bring the rate up for the end of the piece. So, you know, I think that's all I've got to say about the 5K row. And, you know, I would just conclude everything by saying, you know, we've looked at different things. We've looked at how do you figure out what your target pace is. We've looked at how to start the piece. We've looked at how to settle into the piece, create that rhythm, an efficient rhythm, be smart in the first half of the piece, but race it. We've learned about how not the trap to fall into. We don't want to project. We want to stay present with wherever we are with that piece, and not worry about where we're going to be at the end of the piece, or worry if we're going to make it to the end of the piece. Trust yourself, trust your training to do that. We talked about force application. We talked about surging through the stroke, a hard, sharp catch, sure, not killing that first inch, but just making sure that you are strong at the beginning of that stroke and surging through that stroke, creating a good force application stroke, making the wheel travel as fast as possible at the end of the stroke. Think of yourself like you're releasing a javelin every single stroke, right? That you get the idea. That point at which you release the javelin is going to determine how far that javelin throws. If you want to throw a sort of track and field analogy into this. And then in the last quarter of that piece, that last 1,000 meters, when, you know, everything seems to be on fire, keeping a cool head, keeping that technique, think 98, 99% power, and take that 1 or 2% and just make sure that you have that control to finish that piece. And so those are my tips. I have helped hundreds of people to faster 5K times. I have a coaching practice online. If you want to, you know, continue the conversation, if you think I can help you in any way, in a coaching capacity, you can contact me through my website at www.coachbergamot.com. Be happy to set up a free 50-minute consult with you. If you haven't liked the video, it would mean a lot if you'd like the video. Share the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. And I just appreciate everybody watching. And, you know, I wish you the best for your 5K rows. I do have a 5K plan on the ErgZone platform. I've got one for a beginner to an intermediate, and I've got a more advanced version for an intermediate to advanced rowers. So you can check that out. I'll link to that in the video here, and we'll go from there. So thanks for watching, and I appreciate everybody tuning into the channel. And if you get any value out of this conversation, please send me a comment in the comments, like the video, and we'll go from there. Thanks, and I'll see you on the next video.